Chloe. What a joy to get to spend some time with you. I mean, it's just goofy because we've actually had 15 minutes or so already together, but now we can actually, for real, get started.
Yeah.
And I want, because you have so many fans, and people, fans isn't even the right word, people that just feel expanded when they read your work and touch your mind. And so one of the things that I feel is very true with how you write is it's very present. So to get us started, just tell us a little bit about where you are and what you see outside your window.
Um, awesome. Thank you. Hello. Uh, so I am currently in my little garden office, uh, otherwise known as the fortress, and I outside can see it sort of faces down the garden, and so I can see all sorts of different trees. Through the trees there, I can see the valley, and there's a field with horses in. And then there's one of the new bird boxes up on a tree there that has great tits in it, nesting. Um, there's a bird feeder, obviously, hanging on the outside of the office. And then we have tulips and some foxgloves that are just about to come out, and some bluebells. And there's, in this direction, a bird feeder, a really beautiful bird feeder that David made from bits of wood, in honor of the little sparrows that we lost last year. So yeah, that's there. There's a lot of bird activity. Typically, it's a very distracting spot for me. This is where I do all of my writing and work when I'm not out and about. And it's wonderful, and it's also very, very distracting. But right now it's very, very green, and I'm very, very grateful for that.
Mm. It sounds, what a beautiful collision of springtime and life. But then also you talked about the birdhouse that was built in honor of the starlings that you lost. And so sort of this, of course, true to death and birds, a little bit of both outside your window. Which brings me into my first question, because most readers probably will already know your work on Substack and know that you are an end of life doula and also a baby bird carer. And you write Death and Birds on Substack. So this is a work that is sort of a profound opening and closing of life. And I don't think a lot of people, it's not for the faint of heart. Why did you decide to begin writing Death and Birds?
It was, honestly, it was actually on a bit of a whim. I knew a couple of people who were already publishing on Substack, and I really enjoyed it as a platform. And then I was kind of thinking to myself, "Oh, if I was to do that, what would I write about?" And the first and most obvious answer was death and birds, because they're kind of the two things that preoccupy me most, in terms of the stuff that I think about, and the stuff that I dedicate my time to. So yeah, that, and I suppose really because over the last few years before I started Death and Birds, which was nearly a year ago now, which is just wild. Death and Birds had really been enormously supportive to me, in terms of feeling more at home in the world. Um,
Mm.
and they've both been such incredible teachers over the years in different ways. and they both really allowed me to see and experience a preciousness that I didn't really know was so easily available until they showed me in their different ways. Um, and yeah, I wanted to share some of that, and I'm not much of a sharer. I can be a bit insular by nature. So if you told me a couple of years ago that I was doing this, I would have thought you were insane. But
Yeah.
yeah, I'm glad. I'm glad to be.
I'm so glad. And I do not speak in a vacuum when I say that. It's your writing is life changing. And I'm sorry, but just going to have to gush on you throughout this whole interview because you transform hearts. And it's not preachy. It's just this sort of channeling of truth. And first of all, I want to just go back. I love that you said that you wanted to feel more home in the world, and death and birds helped you feel more at home in the world. Only Chloe Hope would say that death makes her feel more at home in the world. Usually it's quite the opposite. So I love that this is just such a great opening for our conversation. Tell me, do you feel like there are similar qualities to death and birth since you're working on both sides of this life experience?
Um, so
Like felt sense, like physical, when you are in the presence of birth and when the presence of death, does your body respond similarly?
um, well, I think in lots of ways, most of me responds quite similarly because they both. Um, I was going to say require, but I don't know if that's true. They both deserve and for me demand um, you to fully show up, like you to really, really be in the room and be present. Um, if you're with someone that's dying, the lack of time necessitates that you don't waste the time that's there by not fully showing up. Um,
Mm.
so they definitely both demand a certain level of presence. And then I think,
Mm.
with the babies, they are literally departing. Like they've just got wide open beaks that are constantly, every 20 minutes that if they're not asleep, their beaks are wide open and you're being yelled at. Um, but also, they demand your presence because it's a miraculous thing to be a human being and to be in the presence of something so tiny and so vulnerable and so new to the world. Um, and for it to be relying on you in that moment is mind blowing. Um, and then also the fact that you're tending to this tiny little being that will one day fly. It's like it's just massive. Like if you stop and think about it, it's just so extraordinary. Um,
Mm.
as is being with anyone who has a very limited amount of time left in their existence. It's an extraordinary thing. So yeah, I guess what I'm saying is both there is an inherent preciousness um, to both, and I think also like whenever you show up really fully for whatever reason, whenever you like really are embodying presence, you start to notice how beautiful everything is just naturally. Um,
Mm,
and so yeah, there's something very, very, very beautiful about both. Um, I don't want to like just say like, yeah, dying is beautiful. There's, it can be very scary and upsetting and painful and all the things. And also there is an inherent beauty to it, and there's a mystery to
yeah.
it, and it's an extraordinary time, as is any little being's first few days on the planet. Um, yeah, I think just
It,
there,
it sounds like it almost,
I missed you.
I was going to say, it almost sounds like it requires you to come into the moment with childlike innocence, that type of that quality of presence where any sort of conditioning or notions about death or birth, you just drop them and are able to feel the beauty and the mystery. Because I can't completely remember what it was like to be a child, but I do remember just being blown away by little things, and then we get used to them. Um, and it this sort of quality of presence that you bring into your practices and also your writing is almost, to me, I wish I could know Chloe 10 years ago. I want to know, is this sort of a muscle that you've been working on to come into the present moment in a more full and awakened way? Or is this how you've always been?
Um, no, it's not. It's definitely not how I've always been. I think maybe 10 years ago. I'm just trying to think what was going on. I was in a pretty hectic place 10 years ago, to be honest. Um,
Mm,
I have found I found for a long time existence really tricky. So like being
mm,
in a body and having to interact with other humans and navigate interpersonal relationships and the confusion that seems to um, exist in them. And yeah, there being certain rules that you have to follow, and the body thing has always been really difficult. Like being in a body has been really quite uncomfortable. Um, in
mm,
in lots of different ways. I mean that in terms of like sort of like emotionally uncomfortable and psychologically uncomfortable and literally uncomfortable. Like I get a lot of pain in my body quite often. Um, and so I
mhm.
think when I was younger, when I was like really young, everything was just truly genuinely chaotic. Um, because I was just looking for ways in which to not be in a constant state of discomfort. And I mean like emotional discomfort, psychological, spiritual, and physical. Um, and so I don't think that I was actively looking. Well, I don't. If I was actively looking, I don't know what I was actively looking for. Um, but various things along the way have made enormous differences. Um, and death and birds have been huge in that regard, as has my beloved David, who's a somatic therapist, and so his work has been so helpful in terms of me becoming comfortable
Oh,
in my body and understanding what is going on with it and what's happening when I'm in pain and the reactions that I'm having
wow.
to the world. Um, if that makes any sense.
Wow.
Uh,
Yeah, the somatic therapy is something that I explored decades ago, and it was the only type of therapy that really felt like I could access truth um,
Right.
in a body that, similar to you, was
Mm.
always uncomfortable. And it could, the hands of a good therapist, it finally turned me towards the truth instead of just sort of mentally regurgitating what I thought I was supposed to say and
Mm.
all of that. But I think it's interesting, Chloe, because your writing, there's this other Substack that I've been following, and it's about, she's doing some workshops on visceral writing. And I mean, you could teach this class. you, your writing is so visceral. And in order to be visceral, we need to experience life through our bodies. And the contrast for you to just say on the heels of that, that existence was a challenge and that being in a body is a challenge. So it's so fascinating to me that you can say that. And then also through your writing, it just feels so embodied. And I remember talking to you um, over Zoom a month or so ago, and you were describing your writing process. And can you share a little bit about that with our audience? Because I think it's fascinating how you do this.
So it's gosh, I can't remember what I said, but it's tricky in as much as like there's not like a, oh, I do X, Y, and Z. It's it's more of a thing where obviously I'll think about what I'm going to write and sort of let the ideas come through in as much as naturally throughout the days I notice the things that call to me and that touch me. Um, and then when it comes to actually sort of getting the right words, it feels more like a thing where there's there's a feeling in my body, usually in my chest, um, and that encapsulates my response to the thing, whatever the thing is, whether it's to do with death or birds or just something important that I've seen.
Mm,
And I just
mm,
try to let the words that match that feeling, that like hold the same tone or frequency as that feeling, come. And then when they do, I feel it's a match, and then that's them. But so much of my actual like
yeah.
writing process is me sitting with my eyes closed, like just waiting. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's what I remember you saying. I even remember your facial expression. It's like your eyes are closed and you're just like, if someone were to walk in the room and see Chloe writing, they'd be like, what is she doing? Because there's no fingers moving. It's just deep sort of listening, inward listening. You just wrote this gorgeous paragraph, and I'm just going to read it so we can jump in back into the present moment. And I want to hear a little bit about how you access that. So, in your most recent essay called The Flight of a Bird, you said, in my attempts at active orientation towards the sacred, I am delighted to continually find it everywhere. And in the times when I cannot locate it, I know that it has not disappeared, that a part of me has been lost to distraction. Just as birds rely on the stars to know where they are, I rely on birds to know where I am. I love that statement. If, when in their presence, I am not awestruck by the wonder of our shared existence, it is because I am not truly there. So, how do you treat yourself in that moment when you recognize you're not awestruck by the moment? What occurs in Chloe's mind, and is there something you do to bring yourself?
So there's the pretty typical just looking around and noticing and remembering that I'm in a body. But it's tricky because a lot of the time when I'm not present, it's because for some reason, whether that's, physical or emotional or whatever, it's often because for some reason I don't want to be present to what is present, So when that's the case, the first step is, I suppose, compassion, really, to whatever is there that I was wanting to avoid, to whatever's there that made me disappear. That was a big thing for me when I was younger, and for a really long time too. I think that I was pretty dissociated for an enormous amount of my childhood and into my teens. So, so compassion for the very brilliant people chooses to sometimes leave when things feel a little bit too much, and then depending on what is there, like if there's something beautiful, nodding, turning my attention towards it, and letting myself feel gratitude for it. And, it's not always right or appropriate, but when it is, I, remind myself of the brevity of everything. And always when I bring that to the forefront of my mind, always the whatever I'm looking at becomes very, very precious.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. I'm thinking about the times when I have wanted to jerk myself back into the present, where you're just like you started off by saying you can sometimes get critical of yourself. And it never works that way. It's always a compassionate hand, as if there's still a part of us that's a child that might be afraid and that needs to be recognized that it's not safe in that moment. And and that's okay. And that is being present. It's being present to the fact that this child isn't present because she doesn't feel safe. And what an incredible act of love, necessary love for ourselves. I think we get caught up in what it's supposed to look like, like, oh, I'm present, so it means this, and that this is what I see, this is what I feel.
Right, like presence is just this constantly zen thing, but no, like sometimes presence is falling to pieces for whatever reason, because maybe it's appropriate to fall to pieces in a particular moment.
Yeah.
So yeah.
That actually makes me, I want to ask you a little bit about your end of life work, because I would imagine that requires a lot of presence and it's not always pretty. So, first of all, has death always been a teacher for you? And what drew you into this work?
So death was not always, well, I wasn't conscious of the fact that death was always a teacher. I think I was always learning from it in some respect. I wasn't always conscious of its teachings. That took me a little while. So it wasn't always a teacher, but it was always a feature. It was there a lot. I felt its presence a lot. And so I had a kind of tricky relationship to it for a while when I was younger, and unfortunately that matured over the years. But it was something that I spent a lot of time thinking about and considering in various different ways. And it was something that I was pretty comfortable with, in terms of my own, and then of course the totally normal, universal, deep fear of losing the people we love is, ever present. But I was fairly, I think, in terms of like my doula work, I think I'm quite good at the intense situations. I can be present in those. Um, so, yeah, like death and dying and grief, um, serious injury. Like I'm good with that stuff. I'm okay with that. I don't get thrown by it. I don't feel the need to turn away from it. And if anything, I appreciate how that stuff demands me to be present. There's no question when those things are going on. So yeah, I'm okay with intensity. So I think that makes me suited to this work. But then again, it depends on your definition of intensity, I suppose. Like I can't handle bad acoustics or fluorescent lighting.
Yeah.
Like those two things are too intense for me. But I can do death and dying and grief.
So death is okay, but the detergent aisle isn't.
Yes,
That's what we were
exactly that.
talking about. Yeah.
That's the
So
quote.
that's the quote at the top. Which I think a lot of people actually will nod their heads at. You know how it sounds absurd, but one is natural and one is.
Yeah, truly though. Jeez, truly.
So, in my own work with Unfixed, there's obviously this necessity of letting go. And we're talking about mortality and letting go and just holding hands with impermanence. And I'm curious, in your own experience working with the dying, um, and even with baby birds who don't make it, in the moment of letting go, what takes its place? And I'm not necessarily talking about like the afterlife or anything, but I'm talking about if there's some sort of alchemy that needs to happen within us for that letting go to occur.
Well, it's an interesting question. I mean, it's definitely one that I can't give a conclusive answer to. But I think there's definitely opportunity in that place, for an active letting go. But I think it's not always possible. The letting go, if when we're saying letting go we mean dying, sometimes that will happen without an active letting go, in terms of like the end of resistance. Am I making sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
absolutely. I ideally of course, but it's not by any means a given. Yeah, and I think it's interesting then thinking about with birds, because sometimes, we spoke about this a little bit, sometimes they'll just sort of take themselves off if they're with other birds. One will just remove itself and get very quiet, and then that'll kind of be it. And then sometimes with other birds, you'll see them like really in the throes, like proper death throes, like really there's like a lot of movement to it.
Wow.
And I don't, obviously I have no idea when it comes to people or birds. I have no idea like what that process, whether it's quiet or big, is actually like. I've only ever seen it from the outside, but I don't know. I don't know if there is like resistance from the birds that are less quiet. I don't know if that's how it. I don't know if that is how it works. But I will say that I do think it's worth doing some work before one starts actively dying around that, letting go of resistance, purely because it saves that time being taken up by that.
Yeah. It makes me think of my kitties when they're scared or not feeling well. They just go and hide. There's nothing in, at least in the cat body, which reminded me when you talked about some of the little baby birds, where they just know how to remove themselves so that they can just be, removing all the other senses and all the other experiences and distractions so they can just be with the experience of whether that's feeling yucky or feeling scared or feeling or preparing to die. Um, it makes me wonder if there is a precision of senses that in the act of letting go, that sort of that it necessitates that turning towards just the purity of the experience itself. um, and just it's uh, a little bit of a juxtaposition, because as you turn towards it, you're letting go of it. um, where it allows for the alchemy, the turning towards is the alchemy of it, of the letting go.
Yeah,
So hard.
yeah, it's an interesting one, because I think realistically the closest, well, I mean, I did technically die briefly, but my heart stopped beating for a little bit a while back. But I think obviously there's an enormous amount of assumption here, but anyway, I think realistically probably the closest that I personally have gotten to the actual death experience is through psychedelics. And I know that experience, if one is having a particularly powerful experience, is one that necessitates a complete turning inwards, and it's not even optional after a point. And there's
Yeah.
there's lots written about that, and whether that is exactly what's going on in dying in terms of DMT and all that jazz. So I think it's an interesting thought. What is exactly going on during that turning inwards?
Yeah, it's almost as if part of maybe the executive functioning of the brain just needs to shut down so that the other parts of us. David just went through he took the hero's dose of in his psychedelic journey, and he had this moment of, he still tears up when he talks about it, and it just where he felt like he was seen. Um, the inner workings of the universe, and he felt like he shouldn't be seeing it, almost like this is not like, oh, I'm not supposed to be seeing this, someone pulled back the curtain and I'm not supposed to be here.
That's so sweet. That's so sweet.
Yeah,
Bless him. How
yeah.
lovely. How lovely.
So in that place of pulling back the curtain, and I think you do this, you've talked about animism and imagining something sacred and life-like in everything, even these silly computer screens that we're staring at. There is a life force in all of it. And I'm, gosh, that there was an essay that you talked about, it was called Nesting, and you had a dream where you approached a man who was hanging belief suits on like a clothing line, and you tried on a few, and one of them was "I'm not enough," and another one was "Everything is sacred," and that one you said just fit just right. But that can be such a that everything is sacred is such a hard thing for human beings to turn towards. Um, just as it was for Dave when he's like, "Whoa, I'm not supposed to be seeing this." How did you come to this belief or this desire to see the sacred in everything?
Um, so I think I hear you. It's spectacularly difficult, that idea. And there are parts of me that have a lot of resistance towards it, even though it is something that I fundamentally do believe. But I saw there was an image once, and I can't for the life of me remember where I saw it, but it was um, sort of like a T shape, and the vertical line of the T was like a swinging pendulum, and to the left side it had dark, and to the right side it said light, and at the top of the T it just said sacred. And I was like, oh, that kind of like really resonates, and I'm not sure why. And it was just one of those things that really stuck with me. And I can remember being quite young, because my mother died when I was 3, so I didn't know her. But I remember being really young and asking one of my brothers, like, I think I just asked, did she believe in God? And he said, well, yeah, in as much as she explained it to him when he was young as, if someone stubs their toe and they go, oh God, or something irritates them, they go, oh God, like what they mean is, oh, everything. She's like, because that kind of is God, like God's just everything. And I was like, oh, that's an interesting take on it. That feels a lot more resonant than God is like a white man with a beard in the sky kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so from there, there's, if, well, okay, God's everything, then everything is sacred, even if some of it is deeply disturbing. And then I got kind of interested in reading about non-duality and what have. So, yeah.
Wow. God is everything. So you've been carrying this around with you and gestating it and probably manifesting life experiences to challenge it. But this God is everything, sacred is everywhere, is a beautiful thing that is obviously manifesting itself now in the work that you're doing on death and birds and the work that you do with death and birds. There's this quality of the untouchable thing that we all hold. And it sounds to me like death and birds sort of turned you towards that untouchable thing that we all hold. And I'm wondering, since you can't touch it, how would you describe it?
Um, I suppose I think in various traditions, there's ways of speaking to it. I always imagine it as like a little kind of firefly. Have you ever seen, of course you have because you live in America, have you ever seen a firefly in real life? I'd not seen one in real life until year before last. We were in Costa Rica. And one night suddenly I was like, what is happening? And there were just, these little flying, glowing things. It was just one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. I just couldn't believe it. But yes, anyway, so sort of almost like a little firefly of consciousness in everyone. But I think in Buddhism, it would be, is it like the diamond or the gem or something?
Mm-hmm.
And then, right, in Indra's net, there's like where all of the points that cross, there's a little, I think it's a gem there as well, isn't it? Or a little droplet. Yeah, kind of that, just this like essential thing in everything. And I goodness knows what it is. I have no clue what it is. And never will, and that's all good. I love that I don't know what it is. I've read a lot of sacred texts over the years, and I feel drawn to some of the stories that suggest that God, and I do that because God's a tricky word. It was a really tricky word for me for a long time. Like saying God or saying prayer just felt so wrong because my experience of religion had been so smothering and complicated and unpleasant. But anyway, this idea that God, pre the universe, was busy being absolutely everything, and understandably got a bit bored, and so split into many billions and billions and billions of different things, and made it so God self forgot entirely. And so we are just in this strange game of hide and seek, of God looking for God's self and then sometimes finding it. And I get it. It's a tricky thing to sort of hear and take literally. And for a long time, I was like, it's a nice idea, sure. And then there are times when I'm with someone at the end of their life, or I'm with a tiny bird, and there is that moment where I'm just like, oh yeah, I think there's some God here. If God split into everything, then there there needed to be duality for it to work.
Yeah. For there to be infinite possibility too. To me, it feels like that, I look outside and I see springtime and just this explosion of life in so many different forms. And I don't think any of that collaborative energy would have happened without the tension, without the pull of the seasons, without the pull of the day and the night, and the predators and the prey, and that sort of infinite possibility that is born from the tension of opposites. At least that's sort of how I feel it. And that's how I experience it in humans when um, we meet fellow walkers on this planet who have suffered in deep, what we all have, but there's just sort of this experience that is born in people that have really looked at the dark and found the firefly within that darkness.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And I think, I think when we know things, we know them by their opposites or their absence
Yes.
to some extent. So
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. It's all wildly necessary to know anything.
Mm-hmm. Yes. That reminds me of another one of your beautiful essays. They're all beautiful, but it's and actually I was just talking about this one with my brother. And it's called The Visitors. So this is the one where you were driving along the highway and you just felt this deep ache, sadness, and instead of going to why am I sad and what how did this start and what is the meaning of this, you quote, I opened my shoulders and tilt my head back, gasping in between this first wave of sobs. Part of me wants to know, to understand why this is happening, what it is about, whether or not it is mine. But those details only hold so much relevance because while some is mine, some of it is older than the trees, and some is fresh green, newborn grief. All of it requires a body to move through. So it's natural to make our pain and our sadness personal. What is it like when you can step into that other place where you open your shoulders and you just allow the visitor to be there? What's that like for you?
Uh, it it's tricky. Um, it's not something that has come naturally to me. I think I spent many decades literally biting down on grief whenever it rose. Um, I would hold my breath and tense everything and swallow because for a long time it felt like um, what was there was too big, and if I began to feel any of it, it would kill me, is what it. Um, and yeah, over the years, my love, David, um, encouraged me and guided me towards expressing little bits of it gradually. He would, just kind of walk me through, talk me through, not biting down, not holding my breath when it came. Um, and so I was able to tap into the ocean of grief that was there, in a way that I was able to form a relationship with it and realize that it wasn't going to kill me, and that it was something that I could work with to some extent. And so now when it comes, I typically, if I am able, I um let myself experience it, because I mean, to be completely honest with you, because I think that my grandmother and my mother both didn't do that really ever. And so a lot of it is for them.
Mm. Wow. Wow. You shared with me when you just brought your grandmother and your mother in, you shared with me in a comment um, somewhere along the line that sometimes you even call to um, your mother, your grandmother, daughter of, daughter of, daughter of, about like 5 generations back. That's such a beautiful
Mm.
practice to recognize the lifetimes before us that have been grappling with this unusual tension of opposites in so many different ways and so many different experiences.
Yeah.
Were any of them writers? Do you know, have you read anything that any of them have ever written? I was just wondering if they come join you when you write Death in Birds.
Well, I hope so. I'm more than open to it. I'm open to whoever joining. Really, like I can, yeah, I'll accept all the help I can get from whatever plane. Really, there are parts of all of us who have been taught to toe the materialist line and need empirical evidence of a thing. There are still parts of me that feel like that, and I love and respect them as much as I do all the other parts who are absolutely convinced that there's far, far, far more to it all than meets the eye.
Yeah. That's the perspective I want to carry with me for the rest of my days. And you've inspired that in me. You really have. I respect you deeply. And so when I hear that, there's something in me that goes, yes, I want that too. I want that too. Do you have a wish for people that are transitioning, or even for those of us that have a few decades left or many decades? Do you have a wish for us?
I think really my wishes for everyone living is to realize that they are living and to pause to appreciate the preciousness of that as often as they possibly can, and to put time and effort into loving every single part of themselves. Into loving every single part of themselves, because I do have a sense that I wonder if the end is very difficult, particularly difficult for the parts of ourselves that have gone unloved, you know. So yeah, I think if we can just try and manage to find a way of loving it all, and just appreciating the gift of our attention, and not letting it be stolen by advertisers, turning it towards things like birds instead.
I couldn't agree more, Chloe. And to me, it's been, I think my own life necessitated that love of the rejected parts of myself so much that
Mm,
I ended up
mm,
manifesting this constant dizziness, and which was just like, no, everything in me was, no, I will not.
mm, mm, mm.
This is the one thing I refused because I just couldn't. And what a beautiful thing to finally realize that I could, that the most impossible thing to love about ourselves, suddenly we turn towards, and that it's,
Yeah,
oh, oh, it's okay. It's all okay. So what a beautiful wish, um, for you, that you have for others, because I can speak of it myself, that is such a relief. It's such a relief, and not just a
yeah,
spiritual relief, but a actual physical relief to go, yep, even this.
Right. No, I know the amount of psychic energy and the amount of physical energy that all of us are using to refuse everything that we just don't want to accept in the present. It's enormous.
So I want to ask one last question. Actually, I'm going to read a little segment of a poem that came into my inbox today, and I was like, oh my God, this is a Chloe poem. Rosemary Watola Tromer, are you familiar with her poetry? Oh, she's lovely. So I just subscribe to her and they come in my inbox. But it's called Bringing You With Me. And I'm imagining her son committed suicide 2 years ago, I think it was. So a lot of her poetry more recently has been about death and dying. And she says, far away, you are becoming less flesh and more mystery. Less the man you wrote uplifting quotes on the lunchboard, and more whatever it is that drives the willows to blush, whatever it is that causes the crows to caw, then hush, then caw again. And there's more to the poem, but just that idea of death continuing on, that we bring each other along everywhere we go, even upon our deaths. And I'm wondering, for my last question to you, as an usher of birth and death, because I see you as that, a beautiful usher, has your perspective on what matters most in life changed?
I don't know if it necessarily has changed. I think my perspective on what matters most has always been love, and I can't imagine that ever changing. So in terms of that, it hasn't changed, but in terms of how I love, in terms of how deeply I love, that's changed. I love much more deeply because of death and birth.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Yay! Yay! You're perfect.